Makenzie Thomas, and today we're going to be sharing some resources for farmers and ranchers with disabilities. I will say I'm a little under the weather, so I apologize for my voice. Um, Hopefully, it's not too distracting, but I'm excited about today. We get to talk a little bit about some resources here in Texas that we commonly use to assist farmers and ranchers that have disabilities or any kind of chronic health condition type issue. So I'll go ahead and get started. You can, oh, let me see, make sure you can see my screen. If y'all have any issues with the screen, where you can't see or anything like that, please let me know. Um, just some instructions, kind of housekeeping things. You should be muted whenever you join the meeting. Excuse me, but to just reduce background noise, if you don't mind muting your microphone, because there are several of us on today, that just helps with background noise. However, you can unmute your mic if you would like to ask a question. Also, if you have questions and you don't want to unmute your mic, or you don't know when the appropriate time would be to ask that, you can use the meeting chat option. You can see that kind of in your options on your screen in the meeting, and just drop your questions there. We will address those throughout the presentation. Mary Kate will help me keep track of those questions, as well as we'll have time at the end for questions as well. Also, closed captioning is available. If you go to your meeting settings and scroll down, you should be able to turn on live captioning if you need that. And this webinar is also going to be recorded for viewing later on our YouTube channel. Like I said previously, we will record this and post it, but if you missed any of the previous sessions, we did one with USDA Farm Service Agency, as well as Work Vessels for Vets, and some support they have for injured veterans that need equipment for their employment or self-employment. So if you missed those and would like to view those webinars, we have those recordings posted there on our Texas AgrAbility YouTube channel. And we'll share the link for that in the meeting follow-up, and can also put that in the chat as well. So just kind of get started. Today we're going to be talking about disability resources for farmers and ranchers here in Texas. So I'll go through a few things about just disability in agriculture and the industry, and then we'll cover basically 3 programs that we commonly use here in Texas, one being the Texas AgrAbility Project, one Centers for Independent Living, and one being vocational rehabilitation, and how that works specifically for farmers and ranchers. All right, so I am kind of your host and speaker today for this presentation. My name is Makenzie Thomas, and I'm the program manager for the Texas AgrAbility Project through the Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. I kind of come from an agriculture background. We had cattle and hay growing up. I think I'm like 5th generation that lives on our family ag operation, and I acquired a disability at 18 from a car accident and spent about 5 years in a wheelchair. So I kind of learned to navigate things differently and had different challenges maybe than I had had before. And so that kind of opened my eyes to the way farmers and ranchers that have disabilities might be impacted if they acquired an injury or disability. And so I went to school at Texas A&M during my time in the wheelchair, and heard about the Texas AgrAbility Project and interned with them, and then later on started with full-time employment after I graduated. So I've been with the project 7, I think almost 8 years now, and really enjoy what I do. because there is a sort of personal connection with disability in agriculture for me. So I'm very excited to do what I get to do and share kind of resources for farmers and ranchers, or those that serve rural communities or individuals in agriculture altogether. So we are funded, our Texas AgrAbility project is funded through USDA's National Institute of Food and Agriculture. We get a grant. We're on a 4-year grant cycle. So there are other programs like Texas AgrAbility around the nation. There's also a national AgrAbility project. So if you're not in Texas or from Texas, there are other projects that cover those other states. Any state or region that does not have a project has the National AgrAbility organization that helps cover those areas. So like I said, we have the National AgrAbility Project, and we're also partnered with the Brazos Valley Center for Independent Living here in Texas on our program, as well as AgriSafe Network, which provides some safety and disability and ag-specific resources and education. So starting out with just some awareness of disability in agriculture and Texas agriculture in general. Agriculture is the second largest industry in Texas, which generated $32 billion in 2022. So a very large industry, a lot of financial implications for agriculture here in Texas. We're a big state. We have a lot of urban areas, but also a lot of rural areas. And 98% of ag operations here in Texas are run by individuals or families. So maybe not commonly known, but most people think there's probably corporate, farms, and that's what most, ag operations are. But most of those are run by individuals or families, which means that if an injury or disability is acquired from the person running that farm or ranch, it really has large implications on those operations as a whole. Also, we have an aging farmer problem where the average age of a Texas farmer rancher is 60 right now, according to the 2022 Census of Agriculture that was just put out last year. And so that's up 1 year from the previous census. So it continues to go up, even here in Texas. And the trend is kind of the same throughout the US. Because partly farmers and ranchers don't typically age out as normal retirees might in other occupations. So they're not aging out like other occupations would. My grandfather was, a farmer when he was older, and he didn't give up the keys to the tractor cutting hay until he was 85. And so when you have farmers and ranchers working until they're, well into their 70s and 80s, we also don't have a lot of farmers that start at really young ages to come in and, take the place of the ones who are aging out. So our average age is pretty high, which means that we have a lot of age-related disabilities and health conditions in our farming population, like arthritis, hearing loss, and just other chronic kind of health conditions that farmers and ranchers are dealing with. If you think about disability in agriculture, you might think, well, is that really an issue that we see? And it is. There's an estimated 50,000 or 1 in 5 ag producers affected by a disability here in Texas. And that's a disability that impacts their ability to work their normal tasks. So this isn't, something that's not affecting them. They only qualify those as things that are impacting their day-to-day activities. Ag is also one of the most hazardous occupations. So there's a lot of heavy machinery and equipment. We've got chemicals, you've got livestock, and there's just a lot of risks and hazards out there in this industry. So if you have somebody that has a previous injury, and they're then going to check cows or run heavy equipment or something like that, there's a lot of hazards there, and we want to make sure we're preventing any secondary injury. For example, if you have a knee injury that hasn't been addressed or is just a lingering issue, and you climb in and out of the tractor, 10 times a day to go get gates on your place, that can aggravate that, but also cause a secondary injury. Or, twisting around in your tractor seat to see what's going on behind you. Maybe you have a neck injury, so you can't bend your neck very well, so you twist and look behind you using your back and hurt your back. So we don't just look at what that's doing for the current injury, but how we can prevent any secondary injuries from happening. Some of the common disabilities we see here with Texas AgrAbility are joint injuries and arthritis, joint injuries like back, knee, neck, hips. We also see some amputations and things like that. More so wear and tear kind of injuries, but we also have some chronic health condition type stuff that like high blood pressure, diabetes, things like that, that are more chronic, long lasting health issues that individuals are dealing with, as well as things from traumatic accidents. Similar to me, have an accident, may or may not be farm related, but something happens and then disability is acquired from then on. We also work with a lot of military veterans here in Texas, and so there's some other disabilities that military veterans come to our project from the military wanting to get into agriculture, kind of as they're coming and transitioning back from military life. So some of those disabilities might look a little bit differently than, say, arthritis or something age related, but it could be PTSD or a traumatic brain injury. So we do see a lot of service connected disabilities for farmers and ranchers here in Texas that are military service related. So here at Texas AgrAbility, our goal is to provide services to individuals with any disability, chronic health condition, or functional limitation in agriculture. Did anyone have any questions before we get to the next piece? All right, and if you do have questions, you can drop those in the chat and we will address those later as well. So at Texas AgrAbility, what we do is provide assistance to those farmers and ranchers through farm visits and assessments, where we actually go out to a person's farm or ranch, consult with them, and see what their needs are, what equipment they have, what they need help with. And then we make recommendations for things that they can do to make their job more feasible, more accessible, and more possible for them. So it could be things like looking at how they access their property. Do they have to, open gates? Can they open those gates? What was their access to their equipment look like? How do they manage their livestock? And we'll actually go and kind of follow them around through some of their daily tasks to see how they do those things and make recommendations for either equipment that can assist them if necessary, or ways that they can modify their tasks. So if they're storing their feed on the ground and they have a back injury and then they're lifting feed sacks from the ground and putting them in the back of the truck, maybe it's not a piece of equipment, maybe it's raising the surface where they store their feed so that they can slide it from a table or a workbench or something over into their pickup without having to lift it and further injure their back. We also connect our clients to resources, and we'll talk about a couple of those resources and how they're utilized with, in the context of our clients and farmers and ranchers. But there's lots of resources, disability specific, as well as ag resources like USDA, your AgriLife Extension offices, Texas Department of Agriculture, things like that, as well as some business planning resources. So we have a program that teaches business planning, or we also have means to get some business planning assistance through vocational rehab if that's needed to determine that a business is feasible in moving forward through a vocational rehab case. We do serve all farmers and ranchers, as well as individuals wanting to start ag operations. So they don't have to be someone who's a primary owner operator of the ag operation currently. It could be somebody that's maybe retiring or disabled and they want to get started in agriculture because that better fits their needs and their goals. As well as those military veterans who might be transitioning out of the military and would like, agriculture to be their new career. We also serve farm family members and employees of farms and ranches. So it doesn't have to be just the owner operator or the primary person. It could be family members or employees of those farms and ranches. All right, do we have any questions before we move forward about Texas AgrAbility and the services that we provide? I don't see anything in the chat. So we will go ahead and move on. We'll talk about a couple of resources that are available here in Texas that might be of assistance to farmers and ranchers with disabilities or just disabilities in general. One of those is a directory of community resources for people with disabilities. So when we think about resources for individuals with disabilities, it kind of depends vastly on what the disability is. Do you need support with employment or transportation or housing or things like that? We do deal with mostly ag related things, but there's obviously other factors at play. If somebody is a farmer or rancher, and maybe they can't get to their medical appointments or something like that, there's other resources that they might need that are potentially available for people with disabilities here in our state. So I wanted to quickly, if I can, show you what this directory looks like. Excuse me. So it is administered through the Texas A&M Center for Disability Development. They compile a directory of resources that is searchable. And I'm going to try to go ahead and pull that up so you can see what that looks like. So when you go to their website, and we will share these links with you as well, you can actually search this directory for resources in your area. So it's all Texas resources, or there's some COVID-19 or Hurricane Harvey ones. But you can search by the type. So if you need assistive technology resources, or let's say employment or financial assistance, housing, let's just pick housing, in the proximity to your location or just throughout the state in general, and you click search, and it will pull up all of the resources throughout Texas. So I think you can set it for your address in a certain distance. This just shows all of Texas, but it will give you a kind of a list of resources that are available. When you click on those, it tells you if there's a website, what their phone number is, what they do. So, like this Big Sky Ranch in Abilene, how to contact them, what they provide, housing and daily living and behavioral supports, so that you can kind of see what might be close to your area there in Texas. Okay, I think we have a question. Right, Kate, did you want to verbally ask the question? Oh, y'all can't see my screen. Okay, let me try this. Sorry about that. I'm going to try again. All right. Can y'all see my screen now? Awesome. It's dcr.tamu.edu. We'll send out that link to everybody as well. But you can just click through this directory and select what resource type you would like. They have lots of options to choose from. Anything from housing and mobility to medical services to assistive technology. I was showing, let's do assistive technology, and it will show you all of the services that are available. You can set it, I believe, for your area, a certain distance, and it'll allow you to, let's do 50 miles from my location and see what happens. Yep. So it will show me what is local to me, and you can set that for yourself as well. And so this is helpful for all types of resources that may not be agriculture specific, but offer services to individuals with disabilities in some capacity. So, for example, let's click on Bright Success LLC. I can see where they are, what their website is, their phone number, and any services, a description of what they provide, so that I can get a better understanding of what they do and if that's something that would be beneficial to me and what I'm looking for. So it's got lots of different options for lots of different types of services that might be specific to your area. All right. Sure. Sorry. Make sure there's no more questions. And then I will get back to the presentation. Did anyone have any questions about that before we move forward? All right. So that's one great resource available here in Texas. There may be other directories in other states as well. I know our Center for Disability and Development puts those out through Texas A&M, but there's likely other resource searchable databases in other states as well. Now I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit about Centers for Independent Living. And I will preface this by saying that I am speaking on these topics as someone not an expert in the field, but speaking from someone who refers clients to these services and knows kind of surface level what they provide and how that works. If there's very specific information you would like on how they deliver services and eligibility and things like that, we do have a partnership with a Center for Independent Living there in the College Station area. I can get you contact information for them. But all Centers for Independent Living serve kind kind of more rural areas and are devoted to providing independent living skills and services for individuals with disabilities, and it's housed through the Texas Health and Human Services Department. So they are non-residential, private, nonprofit organizations that help people with disabilities achieve independent living goals. So if there's independent living things that a person would need access to their home, transportation, help with benefits, resources in their area, even things like learning how to cook or what assistive technology is available for their specific disability. Those centers for independent living are great resources for those types of things. This is a map that shows all of these centers for independent living in Texas. So you can see they're kind of scattered out throughout the state. They serve just about every area of the state. They may not be very, very close to where you are if you're very rural, but there's some services that can allow those individuals to travel to clients or service clients in those rural areas. And you can find, well, I can include the link to this locator as well. But if you look at the Texas Health and Human Services website, they have a Centers for Independent Living locator where you can see which ones are closest to you. So Centers for Independent Living provide 4, or I guess 5 core services. And these are all the same for each Center for Independent Living. They all administer these core services a little bit differently depending on funding and what the needs are of their local community, but it's all basically the same core services. So one of those being information and referral. So getting help to access information and resources that an individual would need, connecting them locally to resources specific to their disability, things like that. Independent living skills training. So training on everyday skills like meal prep, hygiene, things like that. They can train and help with any of those kind of into budgeting, independent living skills. So there's lots of classes and training options available for those types of things, as well as peer connection and counseling. So connecting with other peers that have disabilities and learn how they adapt and overcome those challenges. I think each Center for Independent Living has a quota that they employ a certain percent of their staff are individuals with disabilities. And I believe like BVSIL, the one that we're partnered with there in the Brazos Valley, employs more than what the minimum is. So those individuals working in these centers are also individuals with disabilities as well. They also work on advocacy, which is learning how to advocate for equal rights or access, accessible transportation, housing, that kind of thing, and connecting them to resources for advocacy, as well as transition services. So transitioning from, home to nursing home or those types of things, and community-based resources, or from transition from high school to employment or post-secondary education. So students that age out of the kind of high school age program, transitioning them and training those individuals with skills they would need to either get a job or live in their community independently. There are a couple of qualifications for accessing services from Centers for Independent Living. And one of those being a diagnosis of a significant disability. So I don't know what they determine to be significant necessarily, but they do need a diagnosis. If you've not been given a diagnosis, it says they can also help provide an assessment so that you can determine that diagnosis. These are services that are typically free for the community. They're funded through Texas Health and Human Services. There are some services they provide, I think like some of their assistive technology training and some things that are purchased, but the individual only pays on a sliding scale of income, so they're not paying the full amount of what those services would be if they have to have purchase service. So it's very affordable and or free to access these services. If you contact Center for Independent Living, they have 30 days to get you in and get an appointment and kind of see what needs you have and make a plan. It's called an independent living plan that they develop with um, individuals or customers of theirs. And so they, if you contact an office and you don't hear anything back, please let us know and we can try to connect you with kind of the network of Centers for Independent Living to make sure you're getting access to those services. But you should get an appointment within 30 days of the initial contact you make with them. They do sometimes, they try to deliver services on a first come, first serve kind of thing. So there may be, some coordination that happens. But the website said that it's an average of 12 to 18 months from when you contact them initially till you're actually receiving the service that they're providing. So there, some determining eligibility and making your plan and then figuring out what's the best way to get that service to you. But that's kind of the typical timeline of, initial contact to you getting whatever services or assistance that you might need. All right. Was there any questions on Centers for Independent Living before we move forward? Somebody asked if other states have something like this. Yes, there is a network of Centers for Independent Living in other states as well. I believe every state has them. They might be called something different depending on the area they're in. Not every Center for Independent Living is called like East Texas Center for Independent Living or West Texas. They might have a different name. Other states have them as well. I believe it's like a federally mandated thing, but you would just have to Google whatever state you're in and Center for Independent Living, and it should bring up the information you would need for your state. If you are worried or looking for a specific state, please feel free to email me and I can get you connected with somebody that can, get you connected to a network of Centers for Independent Living in your state. All right. Any other questions before we move forward? You can unmute yourself as well if you would like to ask a question verbally. All right. The next resource I wanted to cover is vocational rehabilitation. Sorry, I'm going to grab a drink real quick. But vocational rehabilitation here in Texas, it's also a nationwide resource. The one here in Texas is administered by Texas Workforce Commission, but each state has a vocational rehabilitation program. And so they're, again, sometimes they're called something a little bit different, but typically vocational rehabilitation and Googling your state will get you where you need to go. Ours is Texas Workforce Commission or Texas Workforce Solutions Vocational Rehab Services. And sometimes we refer to that as VR. They used to be called DARS, which is a disability. I don't even remember what it stood for, but it used to be called DARS about, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago. They transitioned to calling it Vocational Rehabilitation Services. So if you've ever worked with DARS in the past, this is the same type of program, a few changes, but generally the same kind of situation, is just under a different name. So, vocational rehabilitation helps individuals with disabilities and with anything related to employment or work. So, that's preparing to work, getting resumes together, that kind of thing, looking for jobs, finding what jobs are available for them and their skills, keeping an existing job. So, like if you had a job and then you acquired a disability, what would you need to be able to keep that job, as well as advancing in your job? So, making it to where people with disabilities have better employment outcomes. There's a pretty high rate of unemployment in the disabled community. And so this is one way that the government has addressed getting individuals with disabilities more competitive and integrated employment. There are some requirements to access these services. These are government funded services. Your tax dollars pay for these types of services to be administered. So they are free to use to you. Again, there are some services based on income and need that you may have to cost share on, but that's determined during that eligibility process. But the service, these services are accessible to people with disabilities based on your tax dollars. So there are some requirements, and those are outlined as having a physical, mental, or emotional disability that affects their ability to obtain or maintain employment. So it's all related to employment. If you have no goals to get back to work or continue working, or things like that, they do not have services for that. They don't have services for hobby farms. But if you intend to make some sort of income from an ag operation or on your farm, even if it's, if you say, well, I can't do that right now, but I hope to build into something that's going to help support me or my family, then that is something they can potentially help with. But it's all related to employment and getting people with disabilities back to work or advancing in their occupation. And it is a consumer driven service. So, whereas some other vocational rehabilitations, like through the VA, may be based on what an individual was trained to do. For example, if you were in the military and you were trained as, I don't know, an engineer, and maybe you went to engineering school after the military that they paid for, and then you went to the military's vocational rehabilitation through the VA and said, I would like to be a farmer. They may say, no, we trained you to be, an engineer, and so you need to pursue that career. These services tend to be more consumer driven. So maybe you had another job in the past that was different from agriculture, but you have some knowledge base or some desire to do that in the future. That is things that they can help with that some other vocational rehab programs do not. There's also some eligibility requirements. Kind of like we touched on, you do have to have a physical, cognitive, or mental impairment documented by a professional. So that's like a doctor, psychologist, something like that. Again, if you do not have documentation of that, or cannot get documentation easily, they can help support an assessment to determine your disability. So that should not hinder you from accessing services just because maybe you don't have a written doctor's note or whatever that says you have this diagnosis. That is also something that they can help you get an assessment for. Your documented impairment has to cause a barrier to getting or keeping employment. So if you say, okay, well, I have hearing loss, but I don't need any help getting a job or keeping my job, or it doesn't impact me at all with my employment, there's not really much they can do to assist you there. So it has to cause a barrier for you. You have to be able to benefit from VR services that lead to an employment outcome. So, like I said, you have to be kind of in your mind trying to be employed. If you want to receive services for assistive technology, but you don't want to use that to actually work and make some income, they will typically not support that. Um, and employment looks a little different for farmers and ranchers than it might for somebody who works in an office or as, a food service worker or something like that, because it might be self-employment in agriculture. So working for yourself as a farmer or rancher, or working for someone maybe that is a farmer rancher, has land or things like that. So we understand that employment might look different, and you may not consider your work on your farm or ranch employment, but if it's providing income to help support your family, what that really is self-employment, just in the field of agriculture. Um, Also, you have to require VR services to prepare for, secure, retained, or regain employment. So again, you need the services for those employment outcomes. All right.
I've got a question about the vocational rehab.
Sure.
So, if I understand it correctly, I was in the Marine Corps and was trained as to repair electronics. So, if I wanted to start my own farm, then the vocational rehab would not be something to look at because they trained me as a electronics tech.
Well, so have you ever accessed vocational rehab services through the VA?
No.
Okay. Because sometimes what we hear is people say, well, I tried that through the VA and they told me, I had to go back to school, or they wouldn't support my farm. They might, and you can always try that. There's some, I think, limitations to what the VA's vocational rehab provides. And that's kind of where this Texas Workforce Commission vocational rehab comes in. So they're not the same in the sense that, yes, if you have, it doesn't really matter, excuse me, too much about what you were maybe doing in the military. If you have land or equipment or the desire to farm, or, goals for that, and you just need some help accessing that, or knowing the resources available, or getting support with, assistive equipment and things like that to help you do that, then vocational rehabilitation through Texas Workforce Commission should be able to help you do that.
Perfect. Okay, thank you.
And I will say there is with military veterans, there is some requirements that they don't duplicate services from, your VA benefits and things. So they might typically they might require like some sort of documentation, or you to like call the VA and ask, what VR services you might be eligible for through them. And if they say, oh, we can't help you with farming, or we can't help you with, self-employment because we trained you as this, that's kind of all they need to be able to then pick up, and move forward with helping you in that realm. They just have to make sure that you're not getting services, from your military benefits, and then they're also providing services on the state end as well.
Okay. So would it be the right avenue to try the VA first, and then if they did not come to this one?
Sure. Actually, just if you want, you can reach out to me and we can kind of discuss what you're thinking and what you think you might need, and figure out maybe the best route and which one to go to first.
Okay. Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move forward? I will say, if you want a better explanation of all of this, I, again, am not an expert in the VR process by any means. We do work with them pretty frequently with farmers and ranchers with disabilities, but there's a whole other gamut of things that they provide for individuals with disabilities in all realms. That next week's webinar, be sure to tune into that. These Texas Workforce Commission vocational rehabilitation specialists and regional specialists are going to be on with us to talk about that in self-employment in agriculture and how you're eligible and what they can provide, and specifically around self-employment for farmers and ranchers. So if you're registered for this webinar, you should also be registered for next week as well. So you can join next week's webinar. We'll also record it, but yeah, I would highly recommend tuning in next week for that one. So that's kind of the gist of those couple of programs. And then I'll just spend a few minutes talking about some examples of ways that these programs have worked together to benefit some of our farmers. So we have a couple clients. One of them is in the Central Texas area, has about 7 acres, came to us. They had vegetable production. They're a military veteran with degenerative disc disease, PTSD, TBI, and a knee injury. They had, vegetable production operation. And so some of their big barriers were planting and harvesting, irrigating their crops, mulching, and then just even riding their tractor for longer periods of time was very difficult because of their back injury and that degenerative disc disease. So we went and did a farm assessment for this individual. This is their tractor that we saw the day we were there. And then I'm going to show you some of the things that were recommended. These items were funded through vocational rehabilitation. It was about a 2-year process to get this equipment actually on the farm and installed on their tractor. But I did want to show some examples of ways that some of these programs can work together for farmers and ranchers. So we identified several things that this individual would need to be successful and prevent those injuries and further injuring themselves, and just in general give them access to make that farm successful. One of those being a tractor canopy, as well as a better seat for the tractor. So we ideally wanted an air ride seat. They didn't have one that really fit this open station tractor well, but with his back injury, something with a higher back, better contour, and some arm supports was better than what he had. So they funded the canopy and the tractor seat. They also they installed rear view and front view cameras so that he was not turning around behind him to see what was going on as he was planting and plowing and laying irrigation lines. He could just look ahead, and it has a couple of different views, so he can see a couple different views that maybe he couldn't see without bending his back and neck in not great positions. Oh. And then we also recommended a plastic mulch and irrigation layer. He was laying irrigation and plastic mulch by hand, which was very, very hard on his back and joints. So this implement rolls that irrigation line and the plastic mulch and kind of lays those beds out as he drives that tractor. You can also kind of see the operator station where his cameras are in relation to where he sits, so that he's not having to turn around and look behind him a whole bunch. He also did some standing planting and transplanting tools, where those are the stab planters. You just stab them in the ground, push the button, and it releases those plants or seeds into the ground. So he's not having to bend over and hand plant things that need to be hand seeded or transplanted, which prevented a lot of back strain. There's also a rolling option that kind of pokes holes in that irrigation plastic and drops those seeds in. That rolling motion where he's just standing up rolling It's much better than bending down and planting those by hand. We also recommended a lot of rolling carts so that he could roll things, keep them more at waist height, or sit and harvest and do things that he had to do by hand and not be kind of bending over. They also, I didn't include these in this, but raising all of his work surfaces. So just task modifications like raising the work surfaces, you can kind of see in one of these photos, but all of his work surfaces are about waist height. So if he's transplanting over here, moving pots, he's not ever putting stuff out on the ground. All of his greenhouse stuff was done at about waist height, so he wasn't bending over to do any of that either. So this was a pretty positive outcome for him. He was able to get this equipment through vocational rehabilitation. So that's not something he had to pay a bunch of money out of pocket for, especially the larger items like the tractor canopy and the implements that go on those tractors. Any questions about that one before I move to the next one?
I assume you're going to go over how to get you guys out here as soon as possible. That looks awesome.
Yeah. Yes, just contact me, and I'll leave my contact information at the end, as well as we'll send it out in the email as well.
Great.
Here's
Thank you.
another one that's a little bit different, different type of operation. This is a cattle and hay operation in the kind of East Texas, Central Texas area. This individual had above the knee amputation, and they needed help accessing their property to check their cows, feed, getting in and out of their equipment, and handling their livestock. So the client was using a rollator. He had a prosthetic, but wasn't using it at the time of our assessment. So we recommended to vocational rehab. We recommended a tracked wheelchair so that he could actually access most of his property that was there close to his home and gates and things, pens, without having to get in and out of a pickup even. He could just access those from a standing wheelchair, even if he uses a prosthetic, which he does now. Having a wheelchair to help protect him and for balance and things like that in all of those muddy terrains and things like that would be better. So that was going to be something that would majorly improve his access in and around his farm. We also recommended that he have a better cattle working system. This is a hydraulically run chute. So it's run on hydraulics instead of manually. This is just a head catch with the chute. And so you're just catching the head, but it doesn't squeeze them or anything. And, this pipe that's kind of laying here would be held behind them to keep them from backing up. Not very safe, especially if you have balance issues. So this is a chute that kind of squeezes them in. There's lots of access points to keep that person safe, a thing to hold their head up if you're doing tagging or vaccinations or anything. But it's also all run on hydraulics, so you're not having to manually open and close any of those gates and the head catch or anything like that. And they're also portable. So if you had cattle in other places, you can get these with wheels, and then there's a hitch that attaches to your truck that you can haul that around with you, working wherever you are. We also recommended some quick connects for like a PTO so that you're not having to line up all of these splines. It's just a quicker way to connect and disconnect implements, which can be a big barrier for lots of our farmers and ranchers. As well as like feeding things, like instead of storing feed in sacks and then having to feed out of sacks, getting something that allows you to feed from a pickup or a UTV or something like that, where you can just fill it up at the feed store. These work off of automatically from, a button from inside the pickup. And so you basically flip a switch from inside the pickup. You never have to get out, and it will dump feed in a trough or on the ground, whichever way you feed. Also, it's cheaper normally to buy bulk feed than feed in sacks. So that also helps kind of the bottom line. Again, those rear view cameras and things like that to help prevent any bending and awkward positions, and hand controls for tractors. So we recommend most of the time when we have someone that needs help accessing their tractor because of an amputation or paralysis or something like that, they will need those tractors put on hand controls, but these can be pretty easily built and manufactured for tractors to go around those pedals so that they can operate those on hand controls. Most of them can be made removable so that if other individuals need to use that tractor as well, which typically on farms, if it's multiple people or families that share that equipment, then they can be removable. We also recommend lots of automatic gate openers for livestock producers so they're not having to get out. You can see just the day we went, it was a little bit muddy where those gates were from those cows going through there. And so the less that we have to get out and climb up and down tractor steps and be in the pen with those animals and risk them knocking somebody over, the better. So bump gates or automatic gate openers are, a big hit with a lot of our farmers. I'm going to show, hopefully it shows you all the video. So the existing steps on his tractor, he was having to crawl in and out. And he came to us just saying, well, I think I just needed an extended step. But when we got there, we said, well, this is really not great for the rest of your upper body. So we recommended a lift, a platform lift. So now he is able to, just with a push of a button, get up and down out of his tractor without having to climb in and out and risk further injuring himself. All right, I did want to leave some time for questions. I know we're kind of getting close to the end. I'll check the Q&A to see. Yes, so I saw somebody, we'll include this in the meeting notes as well, but farmers.gov what has some resources specifically for getting into farming and resources available through USDA to help with getting into agriculture, business planning, that kind of thing, financial stuff, funding. There's also funding available sometimes through USDA's Farm Service Agency for things like this assistive technology and implements and things people need if they're not eligible for VR services for whatever reason. We have been told at the state level that there's, they can use farm loans through USDA to help modify equipment as well. So that is also an option. So I'll leave it open now for some questions if y'all have any. Make sure we answered everything in the chat. And then I can stay on for a few minutes after as well if you have specific questions that you'd like to ask. Again, we have a webinar next week on more about the VR services for farmers and ranchers with disabilities and how that relates to self-employment. So if you are interested in seeing kind of how that works, the eligibility, what's required, I highly recommend attending next week's webinar. This is an example of some equipment that was recommended by us. It's a truck lift for a farmer to help him get in and out of his pickup and equipment. They have multiple different tractors. So instead of installing one of those tractor lifts like I showed before on 5 or 6 different pieces of equipment, they have those available for a flatbed pickup. So they'll talk a little bit about those eligibility criteria, what's involved, and how to navigate that service. So I would highly encourage y'all to attend next week's webinar. All right, somebody asked, the $1 million question, why does it take so long? So that's a great question. Because of our grant, we cannot fund the actual equipment we recommend. So we have to work through these other programs and services to help people actually fund the equipment that they're given. And so they have their own processes on how that works, what boxes need to be checked, that kind of thing. We do help. We can't advocate, but we can educate um, VR counselors and things like that on some of the processes and how to navigate those things. So when you work with Texas AgrAbility and we're involved in that process, because we do have a contract with some of these services at the state level, we can help them navigate these things and hopefully shorten the length of time that it takes to get some of these large, especially larger pieces of equipment pushed through and approved. But we have meetings set up with them monthly and actually twice a month to answer counselors' questions and things like that. It just takes a while based on kind of the red tape that the government puts in place to make sure that they're spending their money appropriately and that they've done due diligence and making sure that, especially self-employment, you kind of have to have a business plan, and there's all these boxes that have to be checked before they can provide that equipment. um, we do feel like our involvement in a case really helps the success of the case because we are a third party that's kind of making sure things are moving along. We ask questions and follow up routinely to see kind of where things are going, so clients don't get lost in the sauce. If they're having a hard time navigating how to get them that equipment, we also sometimes use some innovative ways to get equipment that typically wouldn't be funded through VR. So for this individual, we referred him to VR when we first did his farm visit and saw this and said, I think you really need some support to get something more than a step. Um, and so, but it was taking a long time just to get started. And he had cows to feed and hay to cut and all those things. And so we actually worked with West Texas A&M engineering students to help just get him a lift. It's not the fanciest lift that's on the market by any means, but they are some engineering students that helped design and fabricate this lift for him. And so we started that project in August, and they installed this lift for him in November. They had worked that in the budget of their capstone project that they have to do for their class. So it was out, he was out no money on actually getting this lift installed on his tractor. We are working with VR on those other items like the tracked wheelchair, gate openers, things like that. It's just a little bit slower of a process. Were there any other questions? All right. So if y'all have other questions, feel free to reach out to us. Here's our website, and then I'll also include my contact information. It's here. We have some other program coordinators and our project director, Dr. Grinwelge, as well, that you can reach out to. But if you have questions, I would be happy to talk to you about what might be available and things like that. We also contract with a couple of partners to help deliver these services as well, one being an ag engineer, an occupational therapist, and a registered nurse who is also our total farmer health coach. So I will include my contact info in the follow-up email as well, but you also can get it here. And feel free to reach out to me with any questions, or if you would potentially be interested in a referral to one of these services. We have a referral process that we utilize for these types of services. And I think it kind of helps to have a third party involved. So if you're wanting to connect with a Center for Independent Living or vocational rehab, feel free to reach out to me, and we would love to work with you and see what assistance might be available for you. Even if you're not in Texas, we can get you connected to somebody that can help you. All right. If there's any other questions, I'll stay on for a couple minutes. But thank y'all so much for joining us today for the webinar. We will send out, like I said, a follow-up email with some of these links and resources, as well as a short survey. It really helps us in knowing if these webinars are effective and what other resources and things you might need in webinars. If you fill out that short survey, it's just a couple questions on how, that maybe this benefited you or if you learned anything. So if you can take a couple minutes to do that in that follow-up email, we would greatly appreciate it. Again, we'll have the next one next week with vocational rehab, and we will share those meeting notes and the recording link with you after this. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out, and then I'll stay on for a couple more minutes to answer any lingering questions. But thank you all for joining us and spending your kind of lunch hour with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was a wonderful presentation. I mean, there's so much stuff out there that I had no idea. So how do I get started? I think we talked a while ago, and I got a map of my place with the soil samples, but then I don't remember a whole lot, and so this is a great refresher. So how I thought we were going to have somebody come out to the place and evaluate it, but then a bunch of stuff happened in between. So I just need to know how I continue to move forward.
Yes, I can send you, if you'll just send me an email. We have some forms. We can either do them over the phone or I don't know if we have you in our client system, but I can check. And but if not, we have forms that can either be filled out like online and it'll email them to us, or you can just email me and I can send them to you, or give me a call and we can fill them out together. But typically we just do kind of what we call an intake meeting, where we look at, kind of what you got going on and make a plan for the best kind of route to take to get you where you want to be. Whether that's a referral to VR or, just an assessment or something like that. And then Mary Kate just dropped my email in the chat. But yes, if you just email me and then I will we can send our client forms and all of those things. And for us, that's all it takes. We don't need any medical documentation or anything. It's just kind of self-reporting what you got going on. And then we'll try to start working through that. We make kind of a plan of, what we're going to do in timeline wise. And we follow up at least monthly with all of our clients to make sure things are moving forward. So,
oh, yeah, that would be huge. Okay. You said those forms are online too?
They are. They're on our website. If you go to our website, and it'll say something about like get started or become a client or something, you can find those forms there as well.
What was the website again?
TXAgrability.tamu.edu, and I'll put that in the chat as well.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Texas AgrAbility. Okay. All righty. Well, thank you very much. And that was very informative, and looking forward to what all we can do. So
that's awesome. Thank you so much. And I look forward to hearing from you soon.
All righty. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Right. Well, if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and end the meeting for today. But thank y'all for joining.